We are brought to you today by the Self-Help Junkie Patreon membership, where seekers take action. If you've been listening to the podcast, you'll have heard me talk about the new podcast that I just launched. It's not just a podcast, but a community of people who truly want to make changes in their lives. At the end of the day, we want you to have that feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction that you fulfilled your purpose. Can you imagine how great that will feel? Well, that's what we're doing. We know that the best way to make lasting change is to surround yourself with like-minded people. It's human nature to slack off when nobody's looking, so we're leveraging the power of accountability to help you take action on a consistent basis. We're doing a low-ticket membership to filter out the trolls and attract people who are really serious about taking control of their destiny and fulfilling their potential. For a mere $5 a month, you can get access to the worksheets that we talk about on the podcast. Join us for the live bi-weekly calls where we discuss the episode topics, answer all your burning questions. To sign up, visit patreon.com/selfhelpjunkie. So join us, bring a friend, and we'll see you on the calls. Today, I'm trying out a new format. I'm actually bringing back some of the early episodes that I had with amazing guests. If you have a podcast over 300 episodes, some of the older ones drop off. So I thought it would be interesting to bring some of them back. On this episode, you'll hear from Annie Grace, the author of This Naked Mind, which is regularly highlighted as one of the top books on sobriety. I have to admit, it's a little cringy to hear myself as a new podcaster, but you'll have to let me know what you think. And so with that, please enjoy this episode with Annie. You are listening to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go.
Well, Annie, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay. Well, listen, I've been listening to your podcast, which is fabulous. I love how you talk about such important foundation questions. I know you get lots of questions from your, what do you call your people, your fan base, your friends?
Yeah, I don't know. We don't have like a name, which is funny, but that would be great, like some name for everybody.
Yeah, you have like this really strong community and we'll talk about it a little bit, but they submit some great questions that I think everybody has. So I highly encourage my listeners to check out your podcast. Typically what I do is start out with a little bit about your family history. Start with like maybe what your dad did for a living.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a pretty unique situation, I think. I grew up actually in a one-room log cabin on the backside of a mountain. It was at 10,500 feet. We didn't have electricity or running water. We had to actually walk out to the spring to haul water back in like 5-gallon tanks.
Oh my goodness.
And heated up on a wood-burning stove in order to kind of cook and bathe. And my dad was a house painter. He had gone to school actually for film, and he was really quite successful in that. He'd gone to a really nice school, but then it was in Denver. He was from the Bronx. And so when he moved to Denver, he went to school, and then some friends drove up into the Rocky Mountains, and he just really fell in love. So after college, he moved into this tiny little cabin, and he's been there ever since. He still lives there today. And so I grew up there. Yeah. And really lived there until I went away to college.
Wow. Where did you end up going to school?
Up in Fort Collins. It's a local school in Colorado. Yeah. Colorado State University.
Oh, very nice. And tell me a little bit about your extended family. I know you have a brother. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your mom?
Yeah. So I have 2 brothers and my mom. And it's good. My mom actually lives sort of part-time here these days and part-time in Australia. She's married to an Australian man, so she commutes back and forth, which is cool, but we get to see her a lot. And my brother is basically like has a homestead, not quite as remote, but similar to how I grew up with. He has lots of animals and takes care of them. My other brother is a ski instructor.
Oh, he is. Okay. A homesteader that, I'm totally obsessed with. Do you watch that Alaska, The Last Frontier?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Those people are amazing. So what was it like in your house? Because I know from I listened to your audiobook, which was amazing. So from listening to that, I know that both your brother and your dad no longer drank. Was your dad drinking while you were growing up?
No, he quit drinking after college, so I never knew him to drink.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, early days.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I do want to talk a little bit about your dad's process for stopping, because that was just fascinating to me. He was one of those, I think you mentioned he was one of those who just made the decision and quit. So
yeah. So I learned the term for that now, which is like spontaneous sobriety. And I asked him about it, and it was really just, he's like, yeah, just wasn't doing many favors anymore. I was just decided I was done. And it was, for him, there was, I think the key at the source of it to changing any behavior is that, like, it's not part of you that's committed, it's all of you, and it's all of you 110%, and not just for a minute, but for all time. And like that level of kind of decision of being like, okay, he was so certain that it wasn't doing him any favors and it wasn't who he wanted to be, that he just quit. Like, he never went anywhere. He never even probably told anybody. He was just done drinking.
Was there something that led up to that decision? Did something bad happen, or he just was like, because not everybody needs like something horrific to happen to stop.
Yeah, he didn't have anything bad happen. There was no rock bottom, no even monumental moment. It was just sort of, I don't know, I think it was a combination of health and just sort of resolve. And he just was done. Just decided it wasn't worth it for him.
Do you feel like he had the addiction component, or he just cut it off before that happened?
What do you mean by the addiction component?
Well, I mean, like most people that I speak to who struggle with alcoholism or alcohol, whatever you want to call it, the addictive part of drinking, can't stop or have a really hard time stopping. But some people make that decision before that kind of kicks in. And I just wonder if maybe you think he was able to, be rational and just make that decision before like an addictive component kicked in.
Yeah, that's certainly not really how I've come to understand things. I mean, I think that's very much how it appears, that we have this group of people who can't stop, and then we have this other group of people who can stop, and then, but I think it is that the more we drink, the more our brain changes. And so I think that over time, and studies have shown this, like with mice and rats, like human beings can and will become addicted to alcohol with the right level of drinking and the right circumstances over the right amount of time. And so, but I think there's really, really differing levels of addiction. So I think, and this is a fact according to the Centers for Disease Control, but of excessive drinkers, only 10% of them are chemically addicted. Chemically meaning they have very severe withdrawal symptoms, and they're not going to be able to stop, probably without assistance. If it drinks in front of them, they're going to drink it. They're going to be compelled. And 90% of excessive drinkers are not chemically addicted. So that really, not my dad's experience, my own experience, now the experience of, thousands and thousands of people who have written me letters, combined with that evidence by the CDC, really leads me to believe that there is a much stronger kind of emotional and psychological component that is at play here. And that really most people do, with the right understanding of alcohol and the right understanding of what's happening in their lives, have the ability to let it go in a very quick way. And I think where we get tripped up is we believe it's much harder than it needs to be. We believe that there's something going on that maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but again, statistically, really, it's only 10% that are going to have a huge amount of trouble. But you cannot do anything. I firmly believe that you can't really do anything long-term that you don't truly feel like doing. So if you don't feel like letting go of alcohol, but you're trying to let go of it, it's not going to work long-term. You're going to be able to do it for a few weeks or a few months or a few days, and then you're going to come back to it because you actually feel like drink. Now, certainly we can go to the dentist if we don't feel like it, but we'd be hard pressed to go to the dentist every single day unless there was something else compelling us to, right? Because we just say, forget this. Like, I don't want to do this. This sucks. I don't feel like doing this. And so I think that's really the key. I mean, with my dad, like he reached a point where he's like, I no longer feel like drinking. I don't feel like this is doing anything in my life that's helpful. I don't feel good anymore when I'm doing it. The fun, that ship has sailed, and this is not something that's serving me. And so it was a fairly easy thing. Now, I think a lot of people probably need, certainly more information and more exploration of their own lives and their own situation to get to a point where they don't feel like it anymore. But I think for the vast majority of people, 90% of people, that's the thing, is really coming to a point where you understand what's happening well enough, and you understand where both decisions are going to get you at the end of the day, the drink or not the drink, to the point where you're like, okay, well, I don't feel like I want to go down that path anymore. And my feelings for not drinking have now outweighed my feelings for drinking. So I guess it's kind of taking it out of this realm of, I mean, certainly there are people who are chemically addicted. There is something that actually changes in your brain for those 10% of people that makes it literally almost impossible not to drink. But it's not the majority of the people that I work with. I think that, my work is much more targeted, because a lot of people will read my work and go back to much more mindful drinking. So it isn't even an all or nothing solution for a huge number of people. They'll go back and drink on occasion. So it is, quite, I'd say, different than like the very traditional, like sort of rehab or detox sort of circles.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I have to tell you what I love the most about your work. Two things. When I was listening to your audiobook, I was like, this woman is like the denial ninja. It's like all these, like you address all the things that people thinking about quitting drinking are asking themselves. But it was interesting. What's so great about your work is you're meeting people at the very beginning. And I felt like you were positioning the information that was not insulting or disrespectful, but you don't seem to challenge people's egos or pride. You know what I mean? It's like they're already struggling with their self-esteem. And so you're not challenging them on that level. You're just simply responding to the questions that we all asked, like, is this fun? Is this really fun? Is this really relaxing? Is this really a problem? I was like, that was just fascinating to me, that you sort of tapped into this vein that so many people, that's where everyone starts, right? And we kind of come to the same conclusion, no matter whether it's 12-step or rehab, or we're all kind of coming to the same conclusion. And I think it's interesting that lots of your people are able to drink moderately. That was not my experience.
I would not say lots.
Oh, okay.
I think there's a minority of people, and I think they have caught it at a place. And I really want to get into what you said, but just to clarify that, I think that the thing that I've seen with the people that can drink on occasion is they literally reach a point where they don't really like care about it anymore. So they reach a point where mentally they're like, okay, like it's not really that important. And then at that point they're like, okay, well, I could have a drink, and when I'm talking about on occasion, I'm talking about like once every 3 or 4 months. And so it is really a minority, but it is definitely, I think what's interesting about that is the fact that then it becomes a much more mainstream conversation, because most people who are drinking, and you probably know this from your experience, certainly know it from my experience, the last thing I wanted was to stop drinking. I wanted to get back in control of my drinking. I wanted to be like everybody else, yes, drink on occasion and drink normally and stuff. Yeah. And so having that as truth with my work, but then also, understanding, because I think what it does is, I love that denial ninja. That's cool. I've never heard that before, but then that's awesome.
My friend Arlena calls me the denial ninja. Just saying.
Through that self-exploration, you then do get to a point of, okay, well, let's explore your motivations to drink on occasion. Yes. Are they really still founded in you seeing a benefit? And if so, let's talk about that benefit. Like, what is that benefit really? And then B, like, what I really walk through people through something called non-negotiables. So if you do want to go and moderately drink, like, what are the lines you're no longer willing to cross? And if you cross those lines, you're putting yourself basically in another timeout from alcohol, because you can't, you have to decide what's most important to you. And so there's like a process for that. And I think as a result of that, I would say the majority of people end up saying, it's not worth it. Like, I have a whole basically thing on moderation about how neurochemically it's very difficult, about how physiologically it's very difficult, psychologically it's very difficult. There's so much stacked against us to try to moderate an addictive substance that when people are like understand all those facts, they really come to a place of understanding personally that like, okay, that's actually not something I want to do. But then they're doing it as a very much, okay, I get to live this alcohol-free life, not kind of this has been forced upon me. And I think a lot of what I'm trying to do just in general is say, hey, this is your decision at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like no matter if what program we're in, it's our decision to show up to the meeting or not show up to the meeting. It's our decision to check ourselves in, not check, like whatever it is our decision. And it's saying, so instead of us looking at this as something that was like, okay, I have to do this because my spouse is telling me, or my job is telling me, or society is telling me, or everything's wrong. We break through that and to be like, okay, what do I really want? And I think for anybody, no matter what program, that is the moment of us actually taking ownership and responsibility and turning things around as we stop saying, what should I be doing? And we say, what do I want to be doing? And when we explore that, then we realize, okay, I don't necessarily want to be doing this anymore.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's about focusing on the solution and instead of the problem. And I heard this old timer talk about it doesn't matter what the problem is, the solution is the same. And he says the solution is spiritual, it's simple, and it has nothing to do with the problem. But I have a couple of things. I'm so excited to talk to you. I have like 1,000 questions, but one of the things I really like about your research is that, and your approach is that it's so like scientific. Do you have a science background? Like you're talking about, you know, neurochemicals and neuroscience, and you talk about all this research, and where does this all come from?
Well, I do have a master's in science, but that is not like what I would say is the crux of it. It's actually really, for me, it's always been like I'd call myself more of a street scientist. Like it's always been really a personal journey that I cannot, since I was a kid, cannot do something that I don't understand why behind. And that's always been, I remember these like conversations with my mom, do this, well, why? Well, why? Well, if and I always remember so vividly, like, because I said so is not a valid reason. It does not stand up to,
right.
You know, my level of.
You're not going to get my buy-in.
Right. And so I think that was really something that was true for me. I mean, when I really started this journey for myself, it was a moment of being like, okay, why is it? Because unlike, I think, you know, other people, I didn't drink a lot in college and I didn't drink a lot in high school. And so I was very much, I don't know, I don't even remember, I could probably count on 2 hands the times that I really went, like I just wasn't with that crowd. I was kind of like academically a nerd, like I just was in a different whole world. And so it wasn't until I was, you know, so good at school that I got these very high level jobs and I got put into these high level careers. And then guess what? Academically a nerd and boozing it up finally became completely synonymous socially. And all of a sudden I was in this world of alcohol where I'd never been before. And I didn't have a lot of caution. My dad, he didn't preach against alcohol. He wasn't like, I'm sober, or I'm in recovery. And this is like, there was no caution. I didn't even know that he did or didn't drink because I didn't even have an awareness of like what alcohol really was. Like it wasn't even a conversation in our house. It just wasn't present. And so when I started to really be pressured into drinking at work, I was like, sure, why not? If this is part of being successful in my job, then yeah, you know, no problem. Like I didn't have any reason not to. But I think then if you fast forward to when I really started to question it, some of the questions that came up were, well, first of all, it was like, okay, fine. So this is a problem. My husband isn't happy with me anymore. I'm getting too many hangovers, so I'm just going to quit. And when I didn't find that super easy to just stop, and actually I didn't say I was going to quit. I said I was going to cut back. And when I didn't find that super easy, I started getting like, okay, what happened? Because I vividly remember a time for, you know, I'd say, you know, all of my teenage years, a good portion of my early 20s where I wasn't a regular drinker, that I didn't understand why all of a sudden this substance seemed to have such a hold on me. Like, why did I feel like I was missing out? Why did I feel deprived? What was going on? What had changed? And that was the question that really drove me, I'd say. What had changed? What had changed? Because I remember going on vacations to Mexico and never even picking up a drink. I remember being in Las Vegas, drinking age for multiple days and never even thinking about drinking because it just wasn't on my radar. I remember going through very stressful events and not ever crossing my mind to reach for alcohol. And I remember all of that in my adult life. So then reaching this point in my early 30s where all of a sudden it was a problem, and the breaks I would take were very much like, okay, yeah, sure, I could stop drinking for a week or two. And by the way, every time I got pregnant for 9 months, but the whole time I was feeling deprived. I was feeling like I was missing out. I was feeling like in a bad mood. And I was like, how is this, like, what has changed? And I think finding the answer to that question was really what drove all of the research. And yeah, I find with research, once you find one, it's like a tree where you see the root and then you start to go and there's another path and another path and another path. And then all of a sudden you have a book with 400, citations, and you're like, how did that happen?
Wow.
But yeah.
That's it. Yeah, no, that was sort of the starting of my recovery was I started asking the questions because I was in a sales position way back then, and everybody I worked with drank heavily. And it's still like you were saying, it was like in the professional world, it was so acceptable. But my behavior was different than everybody else's. And so it was like, why am I different than everyone else? Everyone else seems to be doing the same thing and they're not having the same kinds of consequences. Why am I different? For me, it was like, I like your question better though. What changed? Because my question was, what's wrong with me? Like I took it to like a moral, like broken level, but,
I think that's really common. I think that's, that's one of the things that I think, like the introduction of my book is basically, look, there's nothing wrong with you. Like alcohol is addictive. And, the fact that society touts it as like the thing to drink and you became addicted, that has nothing to do with your worth as a human being. And I think that is such an important message. And I don't know where we got our wires crossed, because we don't do that with anything else. We don't say what's wrong with me because I'm addicted to cigarettes, or what's wrong. Like we just got our wires crossed with alcohol somehow to think that somehow we're broken.
Right. So, and here's something else I liked about your approach was that, in recovery rooms, there's this thing about time, like, continuous time. I sponsor women that relapse. I feel funny about all these terminologies because after listening to everything that you've shared, you have a very, I try to be open-minded, right? I talk to people from Celebrate Recovery, Refuge Recovery, Smart Recovery, all that stuff. And what I really like about your approach is that it's so scientific and it sort of separates this whole like psychology around trauma. It doesn't sound, and I don't know if this is true for you, but did you have like childhood trauma no. Okay. So a lot of people that I work with in recovery have a lot of trauma. So I think the drinking plus the trauma is like, it exacerbates the trauma. Right. Yeah. And then it's like two things that we're really dealing with. So a lot of the work I do and the people that I speak with a lot are sort of resolving trauma in conjunction with addiction and alcoholism and things like that.
My parents they were divorced when I was relatively young. So, that was certainly traumatic, but I would not say I was very supported and loved on both sides. And I spent a lot of time with both of them. So it was very much a very healthy divorce. They're really best friends today. So I think that, it's awesome. So I think that, but what you were saying and sorry to put you off track for a second, but what you were saying in terms of the vernacular really, and like the terminology, I only do that not because I think all the words that we use are really beautiful. I think that it's great to have these words to identify with. I think that I wrote this book without any exposure to the recovery community that I now have today, now being this author of this book. So I literally published the book without knowing even that there was a recovery community. I was on my own little journey, in my office with my head down and looking up all these studies. And so I was really kind of out of the loop, so to speak. But I will say that what's made that really interesting is how accessible it's become, because I think that when people, every single word you say triggers a different feeling. So if you're in recovery and you say long-term recovery, it triggers like a really positive feeling, like you have a lot of respect for the person. You're like, oh, this is amazing. Yeah, me too. And we're like chums and pals and it's great. If you're not in recovery and you say long-term recovery, it triggers this like, I don't understand that. That's something else and different from me feeling, but I'm really going to be like, yay, good for you. So it's like this different, every word we have, from sobriety to alcoholic to recovery, they all trigger emotions in people. And I think by just staying away from all of those words, it makes it so that my book doesn't do that. And so that you're walking into it. And if I'm just using, it's like, it's going to be a really bad example, but it's like when they tell kids to like use the right words for certain parts of their body so that like it becomes really sort of scientific, right? Like, let's just use the word alcohol use disorder because that's what's in the medical journals. And then we can explain that word, or let's just use the word like not drinking instead of, in recovery, because then people don't have like these, it just makes it. And so that's why, I mean, and that was accidental. Like I said, I fell into that simply because I'd written the book without any of the vernacular, but now I try to stick to it because I do think it makes it really approachable for Joe off the street who just, maybe not even, I mean, I have reviews on my book that are just so interesting because they're like, I read this from my brother who's struggling and now I don't even like beer anymore. Thanks a lot, 5 stars. And so it's
not
really
thanks a lot, but thanks a lot.
like kind of sarcastic, but like kind of also like 5 stars. Like, I'm happy about this, but you kind of brain tricked me into not liking beer. and so it's just funny because it's reaching people who would have never, ever in their lives gone to read something like that for themselves, And my next book is even more kind of on that spectrum of, because it's just a 30-day challenge. It's called The Alcohol Experiment. It's even more like totally low barrier to entry, absolutely no, kind of dip a toe, see what it's like, instead of, really opening, I guess, lowering the barrier to entry. Because right now, how, at least for me, when I was starting to question it in my mind, and this was probably, I'd say 6 or 7 years ago, the question was, do I have a problem or am I an alcoholic? And I would love it if the question was, would I be a little happier drinking less? Because that question will get a lot of people in the door that we can have a really great conversation with. And then we have a lot of different tools that we can give people, and people go on their own paths. Whereas do I have a problem, I'm an alcoholic, that puts up a big, huge door called denial. And then we get very few people in the room with us to have the conversation.
Yeah. No, I love that. You said so many things. I'm not quite sure where to take this. I do want to talk about the alcohol experiment. So let's put a pin in that. Don't let me forget about that part. I'm going to make you responsible for this interview.
No, I got it. I actually have, the book got delivered to me today, so it's on my desk, top of mind.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Lowering the barrier to entry, that's genius, because those were, when I was contemplating my drinking, those were really tough questions. And it took me, like I said, it took me a couple of years to sort of sort through it all. And, I've interviewed lots of people and, that's just a lot to swallow, right? That's tough to swallow.
It's tough to swallow. And those years, I mean, I know for me, those years that I asked those questions were years that my drinking was progressively getting worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, and I'm not opposed to painful experiences because, and I even tell some of the girls that I work with, they tell me about a painful experience and I'm like, let it burn you a little bit, because the next time you're tempted to do that, it's important to remember like cause and effect, like how those choices made you feel. Okay, well, let's go ahead and talk about the alcohol experiment. But first, so you have 2 books out now. It's the Naked Mind, Control Alcohol, Find Freedom, Discover Happiness, and Change Your Life, right? That's the first one, right? And I think in the book you mentioned that it started out as journals.
Yeah, it was really it's so many more words than ended up in the book, which is funny. I guess that's the way it always is. I think the book is about 70,000 words and I probably have 300,000 words of journals. But it was just really me, once I started asking that question of like, okay, why is this different now? Why is this affecting me differently? Why do I care more about this? Like, what is this that has a hold on me? And I was like, is it really this like amazing thing that right now I believe it to be? But there's increasing evidence that actually it's not as amazing. Would my life really fall apart without it? Because I had become to believe it was like the duct tape in my life, keeping everything together, the parenting, the job, everything else. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to I did something pretty probably revolutionary in hindsight, although I didn't think it was revolutionary at the time, but I stopped trying to stop drinking. And I decided that like that level of noise that was in my head from my rules of, okay, I'm going to, and it was really me trying to like cut back and not being successful. So it wasn't really that I was like, I'm going to stop drinking, but I was like, okay, I had all these rules, like, only wine, never anything else, or only beer, never anything else, or only on Friday and Saturday, never during the week, or only whatever. And I kept trying with all these rules, and all these rules that I wasn't keeping did a bunch of really negative things inside of me. I lost trust with myself. I didn't believe myself anymore. I was living in this place where like anything I said, I was like, yeah, I call BS on that, because obviously look at your track record. It created this level of noise in my head that was off the charts, around not only beating myself up about it, but also wondering, okay, like, what is my limit? When can I have my next one? When I wasn't drinking, I was thinking about the next time that I was going to allow myself to drink. When I was drinking, I was either drunk and not thinking of anything, or I was coming out of it and really regretting the drinking and wondering why I couldn't keep it more together and what was going on with me. And so I really decided to stop trying that madness and say, okay, I'm going to get off this insanity merry-go-round, and I'm going to answer this question. But I'm going to promise myself to answer this question. So I'm going to dedicate time all the time. Literally, I think it was probably daily for over 12 to 13 months to answering this question, to understanding what has changed. And when I started doing that, that's where those journals, because I was always traveling, and I always had my laptop. So I just had it in notes, I had a document, and I just like kept putting things in and putting links to different studies and reading articles. And there's surprisingly little until you start really digging below the surface. Most of the stuff you can Google is really biased on the side of pro alcohol until you start getting into the studies. And then the huge majority is like, no, alcohol is bad, but it's just really almost covered up. And when I got to the end of this, I was like, this is a conspiracy. What is happening? And it was like this, like, oh my gosh, how do we not all know this? And then I became
tell the world.
Oh yeah, I was this evangelist that people didn't know. I mean, I remember we were coming home from a party once, and a friend of ours pulled my husband aside and said, hey, what's it like to live with the anti-alcohol evangelist? And I was really, making people angry on a frequent basis. Yeah, it was
Were you
not good. But I was
about not drinking?
I would never describe my personality as confrontational, but I was certainly like inquisitive. So it was more, did you know? I just learned, and just 2 drinks a week can increase breast cancer by 15%. Did you know that? I'm totally blown away to learn that. Do you know that? While she has a glass of wine in her hand. I didn't realize that was really like a counterproductive, like it wasn't helpful to my friends or to me or to our friendships. But yeah, at the time I was literally so blown away with what I was learning, because I wouldn't have been able to tell you that alcohol caused cancer. Like I thought alcohol was a health food. Like there was no part of me that thought like
it's a preservative.
Yes, exactly. Like my great aunt, she's 90 because she drinks every day. Like that's going to be me. Like push me into my grave with my martini sloshing. Like that was kind of my MO. And so when I started learning this stuff, it was like so mind-blowing that I couldn't help talking about it, but oh man, did I talk about it. And anyway, my friends are graceful and forgiving, but it wasn't pretty.
But listen, now you have all kinds of people who actually want to talk about it. And I did remember what I wanted to ask you. I think not having any sort of influence from like rehab or 12-step programs, it almost, my perception is that made your writing very pure, because you come from like you were just, it was all about the science, right? And you weren't conflicted. Like I feel conflicted. It's like, I am so indoctrinated, I grew up in the church, I'm indoctrinated into 12-step and I love it. It's a big part of my life. I absolutely love it. And I'm like, why wouldn't anybody want to go there? But I always try to ask I want to be open-minded and allow in science and facts and be objective, right? And so this information, I think you not having exposure to all that stuff made your writing very pure. Are you getting backlash from people that are 12-step oriented? Does that ever if I'd imagine that crosses your path occasionally?
Yeah, it definitely did at first, I think a lot. I think that when I was just getting ready to publish, so what I had done, my whole publishing journey, I'll just tell you in a nutshell because it's background to this story. But once I stopped drinking myself, I was like, oh my gosh, the world needs to know this. So I just figured out how to put up a website with a PDF downloadable. I didn't even have like any opt-in for email addresses or anything. I didn't even know what I was.
Are you kicking yourself? Can you imagine how many emails you must have by now?
And it's so funny. But like basically, 20,000 people downloaded it in just 3 weeks. And it was like
what did that feel like? Were you dying? I mean, were you just so excited that it was?
I was like, okay, well, I was like in this space of pins and needles because I was like, did it only work for me or am I going to start to hear feedback? And then when I started to get feedback and people were writing me letters and like, oh my gosh, this is what I need. This worked for me. I blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, okay, this is awesome.
How exciting.
But then more than like exciting, I felt like this burning pressure inside of me that was going to explode if I didn't find a way to like actually make this something that I could reach more people than a PDF on the internet. And so I had this just drive to create the book and to make it a book. And so that was very kind of like, it was fun. I look back at that time and it was very emotionally intense because it was like fun, but it was also like a
pressure.
I don't know. I just felt pressure. I felt like people need to know this right now. I wasn't even aware of, like, I didn't know Smart Recovery existed. I didn't know like these other alternatives existed. So like, I felt like the whole world in my hands. Oh my gosh, I got to do something. Like I didn't even have any. Now I feel much, much calmer because I know that there's an army of people and a million places for people to go. But I didn't know that at the time. So I felt this probably unhealthy level of like, oh gosh. And so anyway, so I went to some traditional publishers and they basically said, well, you don't really have a platform, so that's going to be pretty tough. And it's going to take a long time. And it was like a minimum of 2 years. And so I was like, well, no way. Like, I'm going to get this out sooner. So I actually just found somebody, a coworker of mine, his wife had stopped binge drinking with the book. And so she drew the cover and just like, submitted it to me. It was really cool. And then we just figured out how to self-publish on Amazon. We, meaning me and my husband, and just put it out there. And so right before we did that, I would say 2 weeks before I kind of pushed publish, I got a letter that was from 7 or 8 people who had kind of banded together, and they had kind of come like almost a coalition of sorts. And they were from all different parts of the country, and they had been talking about it. They had read the book, they had been talking about it, and they wanted to get on a Skype call with me to explain to me why publishing my book was going to kill people, because I was telling them that they didn't have to go to AA meetings. And I didn't, I never, by the way, say in the book, don't go to AA meetings. Like, I think like one of my closest friends is 12 years, like I think she's 12 years now sober with AA. It's changed her life. It's absolutely phenomenal. I did go to an AA meeting after this happened because I was like, okay, I need to at least walk into a meeting. And I will tell you, I have never since and never before so touched. It was a women's meeting here in Denver by the kindness and like the warmth and like the energy in that room. It was really, really moving experience for me. So I loved that meeting, but they were like, so I didn't say that in my book, but their perception was that this would lead people away from what they saw as the answer. And I understand that that's definitely from a place of just really believing that you have the answer and not wanting to, I was very like, just like, I didn't know what to think. I was in a deer in a headlights, like, oh my gosh.
That sounds like an ambush, that would have been terrifying, I think.
And I think just the universe sort of saved me or something, because I said, yes, I'd get on the call. And then they ended up not doing it. So they ended up not getting on the call.
What? Oh, they did. Oh, they didn't.
They didn't show up. Nobody showed up.
Cowards.
So I was like, all right, tell me, like, I'll take it, whatever you want to say. I'd rather know and not kill people than not know, but they didn't show up. So I went ahead and pushed publish. And yes, we certainly get, it was kind of crazy, but I certainly get feedback, but I also think that now it's kind of proven itself. Like it often is the #1 or #2 seller on Amazon in the category. And I think I've gotten way more feedback from people who read the book and go to meetings and find that to be the perfect combination for them. So I think that's a really huge testament to the fact that, you know.
It's funny because when I was first listening to it, there was a couple of things that I heard that made me cringe. I was like, you know, but I thought, okay, well, let's listen to the rest of it. And, you know, so I kind of get that. And, you know, I love my 12-step program, and I feel like it does save lives. And I get you know, that response is very fear driven. Right. But I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I feel like it's so important to consider all the different perspectives. There is no one solution. There's like no one size fits all, right? Like, that's why I support like the Celebrate Recovery, which is like super religious based. What I don't know is, did you grow up with religion or have a spiritual practice, or where are you, like, you're a science girl, but is there a spiritual component in your life?
Yeah, so I, very similar. My dad grew up Jewish and my mom grew up Christian. And then they kind of like were just in the mountains, peace and love and stuff. So there was no religion in my house. And I was always just told, like, look, you can discover what you want, when you want, and totally open, very supportive of whatever path I decided. When I was about 19, I was dating a guy who was very much hellfire and damnation. And if I didn't, you know, convert to Christianity, he was going to basically, like, he would never marry me, sort of thing. And so instead of sort of being real influenced by that, I was like, okay, well, I got to get to the bottom of what this is. So I went to the bookstore, very vividly remember, bought a Bible, started in Genesis. I was like, I'm going to read this. Didn't get very far because it's not like the most interesting thing from Genesis.
A little dense.
A few months later, I was in my room, and I think we were having a fight or something. And I remember opening just up to the middle of the Bible, and I opened up to the Psalms. And I remember
perfect,
like speaking to me in this way that was like, oh my gosh. And then I went through and I've now read the Bible cover to cover.
You have?
At least, multiple times. And I just was awestruck by like the mercy and grace in this, in like the story of Jesus. And so ironically, I broke up with that man, and he is not my husband, but I am like, I don't like labels at all. I think they divide more than anything, but I would say, you know, follow Jesus as best I can, which is not always the best, but give it my all.
You know, I grew up in the church, and I love me some Jesus, but there's all kinds of other things I love too. You know, I kind of consider myself a little science girl, and I'm a lot like you, where like things need to make sense to me. And there was a lot of things about the Christian religion that didn't make sense to me, but I've come to understand in my wiser years that these were people. I was learning from people, you know, like I was just learning from people who thought they were sharing their interpretation, but distributed it or feeding it to me as if it were law. You know what I mean?
It's really interesting, because what we just talked about you saying that me not having any exposure made my writing about alcohol so pure. That was the same thing. I'd never set foot in a church, and I read the gospel straight from the Bible. And that's what struck me. Like, I wasn't learning from people. So that's so interesting. I hadn't.
Yeah, that gives me chills. I don't know why. That is very cool.
Now. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, the purity of how the information comes in uninfluenced. That's amazing. There was so much I wanted to ask you about, but we only have a few minutes left, and I really want to talk about the alcohol experiment, and maybe because, you know, on the podcast, I do want to offer some solutions, and I would just encourage anyone that's listening to go ahead and, you know, start following the podcast, because you do share lots of solution, right? But let's talk a little bit about, can you kind of give me an overview of not only what the alcohol experiment is, but like what is like your favorite lessons in there, or what you find to be like the most helpful like exercises or lessons that you have in that?
So the alcohol experiment, I'll show the book because I have it. Yay.
There it
First time,
is.
so bright green. I was like, whoa.
Congratulations.
That's cool.
That's so amazing.
So it started, again, not as a book, but it actually started as a series of videos. And I was really at this point I'd gotten that review from the person who said, like, I stopped drinking just for my or I read your book for my brother, 5 stars, don't like beer. At the same time, like within a week, I got an email from somebody who had been trying to do the Whole30. And she's like, I've never been able to be successful because of the alcohol until I found your book. And now I was able to do 30 days. Thank you very much. And I was like, there's this whole humongous universe of people who aren't looking to change relationship with alcohol, but who might really benefit from being more mindful with their drinking and actually changing it. So I kind of drummed up this idea of like creating a 30-day challenge, but there's tons of 30-day alcohol-free challenges. There's Dry January, Sober October, etc. The problem was, and speaking of someone who had like tried one of those in the past, is basically what I did for the whole 30 days was make alcohol more important by white knuckling it. And it was like the forbidden fruit. So although I wasn't drinking, it was very loud and important in my brain. And then what else I did is at the end of the 30 days, I was like, okay, rubber stamp. I obviously don't have a problem because I gave it up for 30 days. So let's just bring on the booze again. And so it almost was counterproductive. And so I said, well, what if I could deliver all of really the mindset shift in This Naked Mind, the information, the science, the inquisitive questions, but do it in a 30-day challenge and have it like be a lower barrier to entry. So that's what the alcohol experiment is. And what it does is it takes you through every day. There's a reading, but there's also, I'd say what's the crux of it is there's 10 different acts. So ACT stands for awareness, clarity, and turnaround. And this is just where you take your belief around alcohol. And this is how my whole method started, by the way. I wrote down a list of every single reason I believed I liked to drink, all of the things I thought alcohol did for me, every single benefit I got from alcohol. Then I went and asked lots of people. So I had this list of like hundreds and hundreds of things. And then I just started going through them and said, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? And so with the acts, there's one for all sort of the top beliefs about alcohol. You go through and you say awareness. Okay, what is that belief? So the first one is about the taste of alcohol. We drink because we like it, because it tastes good. So, okay, that's the belief. That's the awareness. And then we go through a clarity process when did that happen? How did that happen? Did you like your first taste of beer? Most people didn't. There's YouTube videos of people tasting their first hard alcohol and they're like,
oh, funny,
basically passing out because of how bad it tastes. And I'm like, so that's interesting. And then you go through that, and that's the exploration, like really the science, like what is true? Like, so you explore it really internally with my own experience, but then externally. Mice actually turn up their noses at alcohol and have to be force-fed it because they have an aversion to things that are poison. That's a fun data point. And so then we come to the T, which is turnaround. And that's really like, okay, just state the opposite. I'm not asking to believe the opposite. I just want you to state it. And then I want you to dig deep and come up with 3 or more reasons that the opposite is as true or truer in your life. And that's kind of a reflection exercise. So you could sit there and say, okay, I don't like the taste of alcohol. Well, I didn't like it when I had my first drink. Well, I quite frankly don't like the taste of pure alcohol because it tastes really bad. Well, actually, usually I like the mixers better than I like the alcohol, or, whatever the case is. And so then through that way, and there's 10 of those throughout the book that kind of take the core beliefs, but then there's also really a worksheet where you can do that for any belief. And by the way, it's not limited to alcohol. It's like literally anything that's holding you back. Like, I eat sugar because I'm feeling rewarded. Well, is sugar really a reward? Does it reward your system? Do you feel rewarded 5 minutes later? Are you rewarded the next day when you step on the scale? Like whatever the case is. So that's kind of, I'd say my favorite part of the book.
Yeah, I just love a worksheet. Is that something that that you have on your website that people can download, or is it straight out of the book, or?
So the website, alcoholexperiment.com, has the entire thing as a program. That's a free program. And so you can log in and just go through it. So every single day. Right now, I'm in the midst of updating it for the book. So just to give you now I've been traditionally published because my book was so successful. So basically in the book, it's called ACT. That was the name that I came to with after lots of soul searching. But in the alcohol experiment that's currently on the website, it's called 3D, decide, define, deconstruct, decide. But then
I love that.
Weird, so then I migrated it. But anyway, so there's nuances that are different, but all the content is on the website. And that's how the whole book started, was just me doing those videos. And it was about last September 1st when I said, okay, I'm going to run this alcohol experiment. every day I'm going to do a video that like talks about a point that I think somebody should know during their 30-day break. And I was just doing the video the night before it came out, and I opened it up. I thought maybe I'd get 50 people in it or something. 2,000 people joined the alcohol experiment day one. And it was super cool. Yeah, it was amazing.
Were you so excited when that happened?
I was pretty terrified because I was like, I haven't even recorded the videos. I was like doing the slides, recording the videos, scripting it out all the night before, then building the web page by myself, by the way. So like putting it all in, making sure the links worked, sending out the email, getting all these emails back that I messed up this link or that link, this whole like, be patient with me. This is just a beta test. This is just in progress. We're going to revamp it and make it, much slicker. But right now it's still totally there. It works. Now 30,000 people have gone through it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I am so happy for you that you have really struck a vein and people are really responding and that you're helping so many people. Do you have, can you tell me about a time where you received an email that just filled your heart with joy or made you cry because you were so happy? I'm sure that must happen frequently. That's a lot of people going through your program.
Yeah, I got last month we got 3,500 emails. So it's a huge amount.
You have help now answering email, I hope.
I do. I have a wonderful, wonderful woman named Shelby who helps me answer the emails. But
Shelby, I probably talked to her and didn't know it.
Yeah, you probably did, I'm sure. I'll actually tell you one that wasn't an email because we just did a first ever live event in Denver. So in October, we brought a bunch of people and people came from all over the world. And this one woman, she had flown over from Australia and she told me this and she said, and she told me kind of after things were over because she knew it was going to make me cry. But she basically said, Annie, I was walking out of my house and my daughter came running after me and I thought she was going to tell me that I had forgotten something. And she's like, wait, mom, wait. And so I was like, what? And so I went back from the taxi cab back up to my daughter and I was like, what? And my daughter was like, tell Annie, thank you for me. And yeah, I can't say it without crying because
oh, you're making me cry. That's amazing.
For me, I don't know, it's such an impact on a kid's life when their parents stop drinking. I mean, it changes everything, right? Changes everything. And even if you're drinking, even if you're like I was, the fun-loving drunk, your kids still know, I mean, I remember my son telling me he didn't want to sit on my lap because I smelled bad and my lips were purple. And so it just really changes a kid's world when the parents stop drinking. And I think for me, that is the thing, that's the thing. That's the thing. I have 3 of my own kids and it just, it really gets me.
No, when you're a mom and listen, our kids are everything, right? So to give a little child their parent back, I mean, geez, if that's not living your life's purpose, I don't know what is, right? Listen, I just am so grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm excited for you. I'm inspired by what you're doing. I'll be cheering you on from the sidelines over here. I'm just so excited that you're doing such great work, and I try not to fangirl too much on you, but yeah, I am so grateful for your time today. I know we need to wrap up. So do you have any parting comments, or are there any, besides the alcohol experiment? Obviously, everybody must buy your book, both of them, and listen to your podcast. Is there anything else that you want to share before you go?
Well, first of all, just thank you so much for this space. And it's just been a real pleasure. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And I would just say, similar to definitely if you are reading my book and you're in the beginning, I do, I look at our society as a whole and kind of how we got to where we are and some of the traditional constructs and stuff. And if you read those parts and you feel a little stick with me. That's what I would say. Either stick with me or skip over it and get to the good stuff. Because I think that so many people who read it and they feel a little bit oh my gosh, this is questioning the fundamentals or foundation of where I've been. That certainly was never intentional. I just didn't even know anything, but also it's all very just scientific. It's not opinion. It's just these are some things that we should know about our society. But then I think if you get past that, I think to your point earlier, we all really are on the same journey and it is the same answer and it is kind of the same thing. I heard this, my friend, she recently asked her grandfather how did he stay married for 75 years? He's 96 years old. And he said, yeah, it's really easy. You just don't get a divorce. And I think this is with alcohol. At the end of the day, like, how do you control it? How do you stay sober? Well, you just don't drink. And yes, you need all the tools, but like at the end of the day, like, you just don't pick up the drink. And I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Well, listen, that's brilliant. Just don't drink. That's great. Well, listen, thank you so much again for your time. I look forward to releasing this and sharing this with my audience. But again, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Len. Okay, bye.
One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.